I have a bit of a random first question for you,
Mm.
Alexandra. And the question was, are you a fan of musicals?
Oh, like Hamilton was the my favorite thing I've ever seen in my whole life, probably. So I don't know that I'm a
Yeah,
fan of musicals, but I'm a huge fan of Hamilton. Why?
that's good because that was the musical I was going to ask you about.
Mm.
Because I also loved that musical. And that dude, Lin-Manuel Miranda, is like
Mhm.
my top five. I would love to have him on the podcast. Genius.
Right.
But there's a line in one of those songs, and the main protagonist, who is Alexander Hamilton,
Yeah.
proclaims at some point, "My name is Alexander Hamilton." And he keeps saying that. And then as we were preparing for this, I thought of you, and I wonder if you ever say to yourself, "My name is Alexandra
Alexandra
Solomon."
Solomon.
Yeah.
There's so many things I haven't done.
It even
Okay,
flows.
so when I had a birthday a few years ago, and my my husband is like third generation. His mom and his grandma, their love language is for a birthday or an anniversary. They write poetry or limericks or change words to songs. Like there, that's just been like in Todd's family culture, like the kind of lowercase c culture. It's just like a family thing for three generations. And I never, when I joined Todd's family, I was like, what is all this poetry? And it was kind of just sweet, but it was nothing I had ever seen, in anything I'd encountered. So I had a birthday a few years ago, and Todd and our kids, Brian and Courtney, got together and changed. Well, Todd changed the words to like three different songs, like Five Rings by Ariana Grande. And then he changed all of the words to that song to make it like that. Like he did like the rap. I mean, it was about every aspect of my life. It's a phenomenal piece of wizardry that he created, and just like kept the song and like played the song in the background and videoed himself and Brian and Courtney doing this, like performing this. It was so incredibly touching and
That's
so off key in all of the best ways, and they each had a different part. The dog, they held up the dog at one point, and it was all about me. It was the sweetest thing.
that's amazing. It's like a
Yeah,
time capsule too for that moment. One day you'll look back
totally.
and
Totally. We watched it not too long ago. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
my name is Alex. Anyway, uh, but for those that have no idea, Alexander Solomon, this is your second time on the podcast. You are a therapist and a teacher of therapists and a best-selling author and a podcaster. But aside from those activities, how do you describe yourself? Like, who are you?
Hmm. I am well, first of all, it's so nice to be back with you. I remember our last conversation. I remember just coming. I mean, I probably couldn't tell you what the heck we talked about, but I remember just feeling like really like full inside of my heart, when we were done. So I really appreciate the spaces you create and the conversations you have. And someday I'm gonna go on one of your retreats. I think those look pretty freaking phenomenal. So happy to be back with you.
Yeah, I would love
Um,
that. I mean, we were talking before the episode was recording that you're an empty nester now and you might have some time and space,
yeah,
bit free of some obligations to go and do some stuff.
retreat. I do love
Yeah,
travel. Yeah.
yeah.
So
But
yeah,
yeah,
who am I?
or like, how do you describe yourself to people? Or when they say, "Oh, you know, you're a relationship guru, or you're a love expert, or you're a, I don't know, what do you
Right.
do?"
Mark, our friend Mark Rose, one time called me a vagenius when I wrote a book about sex. That was a fun one.
That sounds very Mark Gross.
Doesn't it? I mean, that could have, I ought to, I should have capitalized on that. I could have launched a whole nother thing. The vagenius.
The
I,
genius.
you know, I think that I think the bridge between my personal life and my work life is I'm somebody who's deeply unafraid of hard work. Like when I think about kind of how I show up as a partner and a sibling and a friend and mama in my personal life, I think I'm really afraid of hard work. I think I'm really unafraid of hard work. I think I'm really quite diligent. And when I think about how I show up professionally, I think that's also true. And I think I'm somebody who like leads with my heart, probably sometimes to a fault. Now that I'm the CEO and president of AHS Global Media, this little tiny business of mine, I see, I mean, I see myself how I make decisions, and it is really so much more led by emotion and relationship. I think that's true, kind of across the board. I'm just super in my feelings a lot of the time, and yeah, pretty persistent and dogged and endlessly, I think you and I share this, I think endlessly curious, like a forever student, forever. I know that captures you too, like nerdy, like love to synthesize across domains and put the pieces together.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because that was a question I had for you, which was essentially with the background context that you are a renowned expert, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But also, I know that you're a forever learner and inquisitive human. And my question was going to be, or is, like, who do you learn from? Or are there specific books, podcasts, mentors that you look up to
Mm,
and continually, have epiphanies and insights around?
yeah. I think that I've gone in chapters. Like I had a really long chapter where my most treasured teachers were, and I think because I've been in psychology for 20 plus years, psychologists have been my go-to teachers for sure. But I went through a chapter a while ago where I turned to spiritual. I loved um Loving What Is, Byron Katie, Wayne Dyer. Like I dove into it was right around the time that Oprah did this Super Soul series. And, she interviewed like Elizabeth Lesser and, all of these sort of like more spiritual gurus where they're on the bridge between spirituality and psychology and relationships. And it felt almost like a little naughty because I was like not learning from, the university based or, psychology based teachers, but it was such a natural extension of how I love to learn. And I think when I think about sort of the folks in my field and when I go present at a conference, I love sitting in on other people's workshops. So I could sit with Terry Real 10,000 times and hear something else in his presentation. Esther Perel is a very like treasured teacher of mine. I rely heavily on Sue Johnson and the Gottmans, the research that has come out of the folks who've been developing models and approaches to couples therapy. Those are my forever, I think they live so like deeply in my psyche and my orientation to my work.
Yeah. Are there any teachers or authors that you have not yet met in real life that is on your kind of dream hit list of like, God, I would love to see them talk, or I'd love to shake their hand, or because you're pretty well known now. I
Mm,
mean, you've done a lot of shaking hands and
love
kissing
it.
babies.
I have. There's oh boy, you're putting me on the spot. I'm just looking up and I'm like looking at my bookshelf and I see Brene Brown's book, Rising Strong. That would be pretty freaking dreamy to just sit. I mean, she's been a very treasured teacher of mine. I remember when I read Eat, Pray, Love, and I just so respect Liz Gilbert's work. I think that she's such a brilliant mind and big heart. I think that would be a really fun conversation. Interviewing Susan Cain was really pretty unreal a few months ago, who wrote Bittersweet, which is one of my very favorite. Bittersweet is she's not a psychologist, so she kind of bridges these worlds of philosophy and religion. You would love that book. I see you writing
I'm
it
making
down.
it. Yeah, I'm writing it down.
Make a note, take a memo. She's the one that wrote Quiet about the sort of revolution of introverts. And now her latest book is called Bittersweet. It's basically about how, especially the field of psychology, has become so obsessed with positivity and so deeply afraid of that melancholy equals depression equals mental health equals pathology, that we have lost all of what we gain from sad music, rainy days, coziness, like that we really have kind of confounded that with depression. And then we lose this like whole aspect of our humanity, which comes from like holding the bitter and the sweet. And so I interviewed her as we were saying before we started that I'm we've emptied our nest in the last couple of months here. And there's been no more bittersweet journey than that, my whole life. So I'm so grateful for that resource and her ability to synthesize across so many domains to help me and us like hold on to the bitter and the sweet, and how that's like the fullness of our humanity.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna have to read that book now.
You're gonna love it.
Uh,
You're going to actually love it.
Yeah. Going back to the empty nesting thing, meaning for those listening, like your children have fled the home to higher education or start their own lives and spread their wings. What has surprised you about that process?
Hmm. Um, I don't, um, okay, I know what it is. I think what has surprised me is just like I could have anticipated sadness. I could have anticipated like missing them and feeling anxious. I could have anticipated some excitement around like, oh my gosh, okay, so who do my husband and I get to be now? Like a little bit of liberation. That I could have anticipated. I did not anticipate how much it would rock my sense of self. Like the first, it's a little bit better now that we're in, starting month 3 of this. But right away, I was like, I don't know who I am, like in like a really pretty profound way of like, what am I for? What's my purpose around? And it was about just how a day feels. Like my days for 20 plus years have been oriented around Brian and Courtney's stomachs and school schedules and sleep and wakefulness cycles and emotions. I just orient like really at probably a subcortical, like just in my bones, orient a day, a week, a month, a year around their cycles and their needs. And that's just what happens. And as a mom, as a parent, as a family, like you just orient around each other in that way. And so take them out of the equation. And it actually called up really profound things about like, around what do I orbit and orient? It was really so disorienting. Like the first night we got in bed, our bedroom's on this side of the house and the kids' bedrooms on that side of the house. I actually had a sense that the house was like tilting, like imbalanced. It sounds so like wild, but it was just this like really kind of dizzying. And I know as a young hotshot psychologist, I would be like, these mamas out here need to keep working. You've got to have something that is your own because otherwise, when you empty your nest, you're not going to know who you are. Well, I'm here to report that I kept a very active work life for all those years, and built things and launched things and studied things and did not matter. Still kicked my butt.
Yeah. And like you are a CEO of your business and a PhD psychotherapist and very well versed, much more than most, around relationships, love, and connection and intimacy, and yet still was a 2x4 from the universe.
2x4 from the universe. Yeah. What do you think what happened in your system when you flew the coop?
When I left my parents' house,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I remember feeling just a sense of freedom. And
mm-hmm,
I mean, we could dive into my family system, but I was going back and forth between 2 homes since I
mm-hmm,
was 6 years old. And so I
mm-hmm,
had my mom and my stepmom and my dad. So 2 different houses. And when I was a teenager, both of those, my stepmom had twins and then my mom had a baby. And so I have 3 siblings that are 13 to 15 years younger than me. And so I
mm-hmm.
was kind of bopping back and forth between these 2 homes for, I don't know, 10 to 12 years,
Yeah.
sort of feeling in the family, but not fully a part of the family, if that
Yep.
makes sense.
Yep. Yep.
And then I like left and it was kind of, okay, I'd been moving around so frequently that I just remember feeling like a sense of freedom and a sense of excitement to go and study and learn and
Yeah.
sort of become this new person.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And also feeling homesick and feeling a sense of like not feeling as important as the other kids,
Mm-hmm.
which is very reasonable because I was a grown 20-year-old and there was like toddlers that needed to
Yeah.
be fed and cared for. So it was an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you didn't really, by the time you watched your parents and step parents really truly empty their nest, they had a very full nest. Like you had it out and their nest was still full. So you
Yeah.
watched them say goodbye to you and whatever that was like for them. But you also were fully aware that you were leaving a pretty full nest in both
Yeah.
houses.
Yeah. And even perhaps projecting a sense of relief onto them of,
That they would
okay,
maybe realize,
like that's
uh-huh.
one less to worry about. And the house is already filled with
Mhm.
energy and chaos and errands and chores and all the rest. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it was an interesting time.
Uh-huh.
I feel for you. I appreciate the honesty too and the humility to admit publicly, like, this kicked my ass.
Let's kick my ass. I know.
And it's still
I
kicking my ass 3 months later.
Yeah, it's interesting too how, and this, I think we could talk about this in terms of a lot of transitions. What it's like, how other people, what I notice most of all, I think this happens around other transitions too. You tell me what it like reminds you of, is how if I were to open up to somebody about my struggle around emptying the nest, what I would so often hear back is like things like, it's not an empty nest, you're free birding. It's not, but it's so happy. But what would you rather have? Your kids living in the basement? But like it was just like, and I would have these moments where I would almost start to feel ashamed of myself. Like somehow I was doing this wrong, that to be struggling is to be failing at something that to everybody else it seemed like it was obvious. But what else would you want inside? All of that kind of like those platitudes and those like just difficulty. I watched people around me have difficulty just saying, "Huh, you're having a hard time," you know, and and I think a transition can be happy, celebrated, worked for, desired, exciting, and really freaking sad, or really freaking confusing. So it was interesting to kind of watch people's reactions and then watch my reaction to their reactions.
Yeah. What do you think causes that? I think for me, just something that just came up is a general epidemic. To touch on that bittersweet idea, it seems like there's this pervasive inability or a lack of skills or resources to sit with
Yeah.
hard feelings and sensations in ourselves. And so then we're like, no, it's fine. Don't be sad.
Mm-hmm.
Sad is bad. Tears are bad.
Mm-hmm.
Chin up, buttercup. Like, you got
Yes.
this.
Yeah. I think that's a huge part of it. Yeah. Yeah.
But then,
I think our ability to just kind of offer, I think probably all I wanted was just empathy, you know. And that's I think a hard thing. I think we're not used to that. It is uncomfortable to see somebody uncomfortable.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What um in terms of seeking that empathy, is it as easy as receiving, damn, that sounds shitty, or God, that sounds hard? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what, from a psychological background, etc., what is an effective way to show empathy to those who are feeling in ways that you described?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would feel good. Like, damn, that sounds hard, or yeah, just like that makes sense. That's understandable, you know.
Mm,
It's yeah, I'm thinking of you. Like just yeah, that's not it wasn't because I wouldn't have been I wouldn't have been opening up about this so that somebody could make me feel better or make me feel different. That's not really it was just sort of my attempt to be kind of honest about something that was feeling complicated. So it's not, I think so often, yeah, I think, we come by this tendency real honestly. I think that we want to be helpful to the people around us. So we think that our hot take, is going to be helpful. Maybe look at it this way. Maybe look, and that might be like that. There might be times where that really is helpful, but it's why I love, I think it's why I love these like kind of going meta things, like talking about talking. I think we can also ask somebody, what would be helpful here? Like I've got, if you look at my menu of what I've got advice, I've got validation, I've got distraction, I've got ice cream. Like what would like what would support feel like? Problem
yeah.
solving, empathy, what would you like? I think there's something
I
really lovely about that.
I remember years ago reading or listening to something and realizing, perhaps for the first time in my bones, that, like, I don't always need to fix their stuff. And that sometimes the best thing is to just listen. And that for me was such a game changer. And as a lazy person who is appreciative of efficiency, it was like, oh, I just need to listen. I could do that. I don't even have to try to problem solve.
Seriously.
It's like,
Uh-uh.
oh, okay. And
That's so
then, as
cool.
you know, the other person talks through it or sits with it, and then the storm passes,
Mm-hmm.
and then you
Yeah,
go get ice cream.
yeah, yeah. And sometimes they're like, thank you, it was so helpful. And you're like, I don't actually even know what the fuck I did. but you held the space. Like I think we like throw that term around like holding space, but you really do. You were holding the space by just being present and nodding and regulating your own self,
Yeah.
regulating your own emotions so that you don't go into problem solving or defensiveness, certainly if it's, person wanting to talk to you about you, that's much harder, right?
Yeah. Would you say your work as a therapist and as a teacher of therapists means that you are somewhat of a professional space holder? Like, is
Mm-hmm.
that your gift, or like what makes an excellent therapist? Perhaps that's the question. Or an excellent space holder, let's say, for those.
Yeah.
I'm asking too many questions at once, but do you know
That's
what I'm
okay.
getting at?
I got you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Um, I remember in grad school, and I haven't gone back to look for this research, but I had my one of my mentors, Bill Pinzoff, used to say that when people drop out of therapy, if you ask people why they drop out of individual therapy, what they'll tell you is, I didn't feel like my therapist understood me. And if you ask people why they drop out of couples therapy, they will say, we felt like that our couples therapist wasn't helping us. So I think we're seeking, I think there's different, I think holding space in individual therapy is a little different than holding space in couples therapy. But in individual therapy, I do think a lot of it is, I mean, the biggest, sort of quote unquote curative factor of any individual therapy, no matter how that therapist is practicing, the biggest thing that is the engine of change is the relationship. It is just like the relationship, feeling like there's an alliance, feeling like your therapist gets you, feeling like your therapist cares about you. And so there's a way, like I think it's a true skill for therapists to trade cleverness for presence, because certainly the branch of therapy that I was trained in, which is like sort of Freud and Freud's descendants and sort of psychodynamic, psychoanalytical approaches, they're super invested in cleverness. Like, an insight that ties the past to the present and is like, haha, you respond to your wife this way because of your mother, like these sort of like clever, heady sort of, connections that like you just plop into a client's lap. And that's actually like much less helpful than just sitting alongside a client and just being in the messiness together, with perspective, with a more regulated, nervous system, et cetera, et cetera. But that idea of it is the relationship, actually, much more so than the intervention or the insight or the interpretation, that is what helps clients change.
Hmm. And then the opposite is true somewhat for couples therapy, whereby
So
the insights and the plans and the changes are paramount.
yeah, I think the difference is in couples therapy, the therapist has to truly be a leader in the room. Where in individual therapy, it kind of feels like two people going for a walk together, and you can sort of feel like you're pacing yourself with them. In couples therapy, you will get run over and they will be like down the block around the corner, it's like a bucking bronco, like you've got to, so that when if a client, if a couple is complaining like we had to leave, we fired our couples therapist because we didn't feel like they could help me, it's because we felt like we were a bigger presence in the room than the therapist. We felt like we talked the therapist into, like that deer in the headlights or whatever it is. So in a couples therapy, I think you really do need to like be the leader in the space. So it's holding. So anyway, it's a very long way of getting me to the answer to your question, which is I think holding space looks different. I think holding space in couples therapy has much more of a hierarchical, like kind of not like I'm better than you, I'm stronger than you, I'm smarter than you, but I am actually like sort of holding this entire frame so that I can, make you safe enough that I can challenge you.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've never considered the difference between the two before. And I picture, I mean, couples therapy to me sounds like a choose your own adventure story, or what's today going to be like for
Mm-hmm.
you as the therapist. And my perception would be that certain couples would have conflict or a lot of stuff, and they might just say, hang on, let's wait till we see
Totally.
Alexandra on Thursday. And then they enter the room and it's like, boom, lids off,
Uh-huh.
let's
Mm-hmm.
fucking go. uh, and I imagine there's some sort of whiplash that occurs occasionally. in those
Totally.
moments for you?
Totally. I think that's, frankly, I think for like sometimes therapists talk about hot couples and cold couples. Like I think for some couples, what you're trying to do, like for cold couples, you're trying to turn up the heat. You're trying to help them re-engage. There's a ton of distance and a ton of like disengagement. And so there you're trying to turn up the heat. But certainly with a hot couple where they've got conflict that's really out of control, it's especially important for the therapist to be the leader in the room. And I sometimes will say, we're putting a moratorium on this topic until we're together again. Like I'm literally actually like doctor's order saying you're not to talk about this until and unless we're together. Because for right now, it's too hot. You get too dysregulated. You say that, you end up making these like sort of side roads where you make it, you're fighting about fighting. You kind of get in these like sub layers of it. And people say things that we've got to undo that thing that you said that you only said because you were so freaking dysregulated because this topic is too hot or this, so just save it for us. So sometimes a therapist sets themselves up to be.
I need like a miniature version of you on my shoulder, or have in the past, certainly, where I've talked about this previously, but I will almost see the words coming out of my mouth in slow motion and being like in the movies where you're like, no,
Yeah.
and then it's too late.
They're out.
It's like immediately realizing,
They're
oh,
out.
now we get to have a 30-minute conversation to get back to where we just were because I couldn't bite my tongue for 10 fucking seconds. And I had to
Isn't
say
that
that thing.
brutal? It's so
That's
brutal.
brutal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so weird that like it's like one of the powerful changes that happens in there, that happens with our own personal growth or our relational growth is we learn when the fuck to shut up. And so it's harder to notice the things you don't, it's kind of like weird to go to your party and be like, okay, so I need like a little bit of a celebratory party because this thing I didn't say to you. You know what I mean? Like it's a weird thing to ask for affirmation, but I think that's right. When we bite our tongue, when we don't say the thing we could say, that is so worthy of, celebration. Because yeah, a lot of stuff we say does not need to be said.
Yes. If we could underline and bold that statement. And I have said things to Kendra after the fact when the dust has settled. I'll say something like, "Oh man, I had the best little sarcastic joke that I was gonna say in this moment," and like,
good.
let's just. Can you acknowledge that would have been really funny for me in the moment, but definitely not for you in the moment? But yeah, I think the reason for that, or perhaps one of the underlying features of something like that example, is to maintain levity in relationship. And I'm curious if you could speak to some of that, because I feel like you and I also have that in common, aside from being science dorks and perpetual learners. But the work that you do and some of your other colleagues, it seems like there's a highlight around playfulness or levity to actually have those hard, bittersweet conversations and those difficult emotions, etc., while at the same time not losing sight of the fact that this is about love and partnership and it can be fun.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm like my brain is like pinging on all these different like research like one of the research findings that that the Gottmans shared, well, I think it's not a new finding, but they developed like a 2-day workshop, and one day is about conflict skills and the other day is about like play skills, and so they did a study where they had a set of couples do the conflict day but not the play day, and a set of couples do the play day and not the conflict day. And they, of course, like any, level-headed therapist would think that the most important day is the conflict day because that's like what we do is help people do conflict differently. What they found was that the couples who had only the play day actually ended up far better off than the couples who only had the conflict day. And so there is like so much power in like the repair, the levity, the like experience, like moments of, joy and silliness that we have with each other. And that's a tricky thing about like the sarcastic comment that you thought about saying to Kendra, but didn't. And I love that, like, if you can like put it in the parking lot and share it with her later, then she could get a laugh out of it and remember that part of what she loves about you is your wit and your humor. But you're probably spot on that in a moment when she felt tense with you or misunderstood by you, the very same comment would have felt hurtful instead of funny. Like that's such the razor's edge, I think, of humor is that it's like touch. It's so contextual. The same touch in one context feels delicious and in another context feels like nails on a chalkboard, you know? So I think humor kind of functions that way too. And there are times in conflict where I'm sure you and Kendra benefit from like times when your humor or her humor, I haven't met her yet, but you know, is helpful. Like it can be like a little bit of like a verbal white flag, you know. And the Gottmans found this too, that healthy couples make lots of little repair attempts, even in difficult conversations. There's like a little humor or like a little sticking your tongue out or wrinkling your nose, you know, something that just kind of says like, I'm frustrated with you and I got you. You know, I'm frustrated with you and I love you. So that even the little kind of micro repair attempts in the middle of conflict can be helpful. They're just dicey and a little risky, you know?
Yeah. I think just 2 points to that. One was in a moment of very radical honesty, my partner is an exceptional communicator.
Mm.
And years back, I recall her turning to me and simply saying, "That's not helpful right now." Like, and that was it. I was like, okay, message received. Like, I'm gonna file that away. That's good feedback. And it was just like very neutrally said, but fierce.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like kind of, I see what you're doing right now, but like, don't do that. And then secondly, I was helping at a Mark Groves retreat a couple weeks ago, and Kate Horse. Do you know Kate Horseman? You met her?
No.
She's great, and she was teaching a breathwork class. And breathwork classes, if you've never done one, can get intense and heavy, and there's a lot going on.
Okay.
And at one point, she was walking through the room, and she just said very simply, and something to the effect of, "And can we let laughter in right now?" And she was essentially like popping the water balloon, and then the water was like kind of streams out. And sure enough, the room erupted into a little bit of giggling, and there was some laughter. And then after that moment of sort of releasing the pressure, then they dropped back into the breathing and sort of resumed what was happening. But it strikes me as somewhat analogous what you're describing there of, I think you said the white flags or the periodic nose wrinkle, or the like, hey, let's try to keep this here, and I don't know, a little lighter than it. Or could this be lighter? Like, is this intensity required for the full effect, I guess?
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah. It really does. It really does. It's right. It's like the light, right. Having that levity allows you then to go back into the heavier, like it's the contrast of the light and the dark, or the ease and the work. It makes me think about when I'm working with couples who are recovering from infidelity. You know, it is absolutely the difficult conversations, the apology, the boundaries, the transparency, the processing, all of that. And it is the like having sex again. It is the back rub. It is the giggle, you know, like those, like that is, I think what's so hard about when a couple is like kind of coming through something as difficult as that, it feels like we can't be silly at a time like this. When in fact, like being silly at a time like this is part, like to be silly with somebody is to let your guard down a bit. And so trust, you know, I think trust is in part like hearing words is helpful in rebuilding trust, but trust is pretty much about how my body feels near your body. And so giggling, right? If I'm giggling with you or laughing with you or feeling good with you, experiencing pleasure with you, that's going to be like a more powerful way to have a sense in my body that my body is anywhere near safe, you know, near your body.
Yeah, that's so interesting. This is somewhat of a tangent, but I was talking to someone the other day on a call about memes and about sharing memes on the internet. And so, for context, I share a bunch of ridiculous, weird shit in my Instagram stories occasionally, and it makes me laugh, and it's really fun to me.
Yeah.
And anyway, we were talking about this idea that humor and fun and levity can feel vulnerable because you're essentially exposing a part of yourself that is true, and you're putting it out there, and you're opening yourself up to judgment and to, you know, potential negative impacts in the same way that you are with the heavy stuff. And so to your point there about couples trying to reestablish trust post infidelity, it is almost a vulnerable act to make a joke or
Yeah.
to say, hey, God, this sucks right now, doesn't it? Or like
Yeah. Yeah.
to lighten that
Yeah.
load a little bit.
Yeah.
It's
Or to
interesting.
laugh, right? To laugh at someone's joke when that's the person that hurt you. That's really vulnerable. Yeah.
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 And
Hmm.
so, do you know on that comedy, what was it, comedy day or fun day that the Gottmans did?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
what sorts of things did they have them do? There's exercises or improv or
Right. I don't know.
yeah,
I don't
I'm
know.
curious.
Um, I don't know how much it was, right. I don't know how much it was talking about, the importance of going on dates or the importance of kind of sharing dreams and visions, or how much it was like actually like experiential.
Yeah.
That's interesting. But now I'm curious.
And I do a very rough transition to your new book
Yeah.
because you're on the podcast and your publicist was like, yo, Jeremy, make sure you talk about the book. Uh, so that's not how she phrased it, but of course. And I actually have questions for you about it because I haven't read the book yet, but I did get a promo material which said, so it's called Love Every Day.
Mm-hmm.
And it says it will help you understand the impact of your past, get your needs met, enhance intimacy, improve communication, and address relationship problems. And I read that and was like, damn, this is the holy grail. Like you've done it. It's all in one book. So maybe can you talk a little bit about why you wrote the book and what it actually is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's a 365 book. It's like a one a day book. I've never written a book like this. I think you did a quote book, right?
Yeah, but it wasn't
You
a
did it.
daily one. It
Yeah,
was like,
it was a pretty fun design to work with. I've always loved, I mean, I love books, and I always have loved like a 365 or a one a day book because it just feels like such a nice thing for an author to do, to give you something every day for a whole year. I think I love being given things. And so to be given something for every day, it's just, so then to be now on the other side of it and offering something in this format is really fun. And that's, it's the way I've been writing. It's how I write for Instagram, and this is basically like a translation of much of what I put on Instagram into a format that you can hold and work with, versus the ethereal, it's here and it's gone of an Instagram feed. And
mm,
and so in that way it is like just a daily dose, and it's, that list of topics that you hit, those are all under the big umbrella of my work, which is relational self-awareness, basically giving us lots and lots and lots of opportunities to understand more about our relationship to relationships, all of the patterns and tender spots and wounds and tendencies that we bring in, right? Because it's so easy, especially in intimate relationship, to get very focused on our partner is so this and not enough this, and to kind of place problems or dynamics at our partner's feet. And so we actually need lots of opportunities to kind of keep ourselves in the ring, to understand what is my part of this dance, because it's all dances and cycles and patterns. And so this is a year's worth of super gentle, super compassionate, but accountability building practices to how do you understand why you're sensitive to this within your partner, why you tend to do this when you're upset, why you have a blind spot here. So it's like putting the past together with the present, looking at how we're socialized. So yeah, I don't know if it's a holy grail, but it definitely will give you plenty to think about and feel about and write about, and hopefully talk to for those who are partnered and reading it, inviting different kinds of conversations with your partner.
yeah. I love that the title is an affirmation as well. Love every
Mm-hmm.
day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh yeah, I need to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
it sort of ruins that romantic westernized illusion of love, which is you meet your person and you fall in love and then you live happily ever after and
You're
it's all good.
good.
And like
Mm-hmm.
you don't judge or have conflict and it's
Right.
fine.
And love
But
means never having to say you're sorry.
oh,
Mm.
is that the next book title? Yeah.
No, but that's like part of that myth, right? It's like when you found your
Totally.
person, you don't have to say you're sorry because you're just so deeply understood and therefore forgiven. Don't really actually need to be accountable.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any other myths like that that you hear frequently that you just roll your eyes and wish you could shake the planet and like,
Right.
hey. And so, I mean,
Stop
maybe
doing that.
even answering the question is you've created a book whereby every day you have to choose to read the information, choose to do the work, choose
Mm-hmm.
to communicate with your person or yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and actually show up. And it's almost implicit in the structure of the book that love is a practice that you need to devote to.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's not, I think that is, as you were kind of hinting at the sort of like Western romanticized myths, I think another really big one is that love is in the grand gestures and the sweeping declarations, and it's in the poem. It's in the incredible trip that, you know, you planned without me knowing. It's in the rose petals in the, you know, bubble bath or whatever. Like that's what love is those grand things. And it's actually, I have to take this call.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll
One
pause
second.
it.
Pause it. Thank you. This is like, I don't know why it goes to voicemail so quickly.
Yeah, you're good.
Well, I'm not. I missed it.
Can you call him back?
Yeah, you paused? Okay. One
Yeah,
second.
yeah, you're
So we're
good.
talking about sweeping gestures. Just give me a moment.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm good. That was not the one I needed.
Oh,
That's good.
okay.
I think I can get it right back into.
Yeah.
Or-
And if not, I could just say, hey, you had to take a phone call and it's all good.
Um, that what the research shows us is that it's not the sweeping gestures. It's the little stuff every day that either builds or erodes connection. You know, it's the Gottmans talk about, you know, like small things often, like just the how, like being mindful about how we raise a concern with our partner, to, you know, being mindful and not say the sarcastic thing that really would be so fitting and like super witty, but you know, it's not going to be, that's, you know, that's like, that's the rose petals on the bed, right? That's the stuff that we need. It's also how we heal from harm that was done to us or harm that we've done to other people, is it's not, you know, it's like therapy. It's not like the one insight that makes your whole life make sense. It's the little kind of like 1 degree of shift that you make that makes a difference.
Yeah, the many what's like the opposite of death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Maybe it's, you know, whatever that might be of, you know, an addition or a
Yeah.
building by 1,000 small
Oh, I love
actions.
that. Good.
Maybe one to share with you, a personal one, is every morning I walk out to the kitchen and this mug right here that I'm holding up is on the counter and it's filled with water because the first thing that I do in the morning is I hydrate. And Kendra has developed this somewhat playful saying, which is, I made you water. And then, like, we just have a giggle. And I'm like, oh, thanks so much. You're amazing. Gosh. And then I'll taste it. And I'll be like, oh, God, it's delicious today. And then we just like, it's become like a little inside joke.
It's really
But
cute.
it takes her, you know, 5 seconds to
Yeah.
fill a water gap. And
Yeah.
it is something so small and seemingly insignificant, but when you zoom out, I would miss that. I do miss that
Yeah.
when she doesn't do it.
Yeah.
And I've teased her of like, where's my water? Like,
How
were
are you
you
supposed to
busy
do this
this
for
morning?
yourself? Yeah. Right. Do you
Where do
even
you
love
even
me?
get the water? Yeah.
Right.
Where do you source that
I
water?
don't know your recipe. You think I know how you
Yeah.
do this?
But it is one of those examples that came to my mind immediately around those tiny little
Oh.
things are how we've built connection and levity and love. And her doing it, I think, also is an act of love. And it feels
Yeah.
good to
Yeah.
make my water
Yeah.
and see
Yeah.
me smile in the morning. Are there any, I mean, you've been married 25 years almost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What are there any things that you can look at as key, like what are the smallest things with the highest leverage
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
you and your partner have learned or implemented?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say about I think there's something really cool about that example that you just shared, because there's a way in which it it maps on a little bit to cis hetero gender roles, like the woman, like quote unquote, serving the man. I think that I think there's a lot of conversation right now and a lot of super duper understandable fear and concern from women around kind of over functioning or doing so much domestic labor or emotional labor, mental labor, um, for their men, and about kind of getting lost and becoming invisible the way that they've watched their moms and grandmas become invisible. And so I think it's a really powerful example, because my hope is, and my sense is, that Kendra has unhooked her sense of self and interdependence and agency is not like lessened by the fact that she preps your water in the morning. You know what I mean? Like, it's an act of service that is not a diminishment of herself, even as it perhaps replicates something that, has like a traditional gender vibe to it,
Yeah.
you know?
I'm gonna ask her about that.
It's pretty cool. It's cool. Like, I think I think that we can I think it's one of the hallmarks, in fact, of a healthy relationship, is that we can do things even that sort of feel like they map onto gender roles in a worrisome way, but we can do them and feel proud of them rather than diminished by them. I think it must speak to the way that she knows she can give you an inch without you taking a mile. She knows that you can take this water from her and not make assumptions then about all the ways that you're entitled to her care, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. And perhaps this is a whole separate conversation though around. So I know, for example, I've read posts or articles from women saying things like, but I want to be a stay-at-home mom,
Yeah.
or I don't want to have a job, or I want to spend a lot of time in the kitchen. And this is conflicting with the patriarchal
Right.
systems, repression, sexism, all the rest of it. So
Yeah.
anyway, we could pause that.
Yeah, I know, because it's so juicy. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Or if you know an expert on that, I could have them on to unpack all that. But I'm curious about the things
Yeah,
that you
our
like,
practices.
biggest bang for the buck, like the smallest things that are
Mm.
like, this is actually a big deal, even though you wouldn't think it would be.
Right. Well, one, like, sort of my version, I think, of Kendra's water is, I love, and this is like less, therapists will call the water an S1, meaning it's a daily sequence. The one I'm going to share is more like an S2, meaning it's like a every month or so sequence, which is when Todd and I have traveled, or we do a road trip or go visit a kid or something. We get home and he brings my suitcase into the house and all the way upstairs. I just love that. And I don't even ask him for it. I love that. I love that he does it. It just feels like such a super simple gesture that kind of goes without saying and feels really loving to me. And yeah, I think in terms of like our daily habits, we're really good about going for a walk after dinner. And I think that's just there's something, we're both huge walkers. I love walking with my girlfriends. I love walking with our kids. I love walking with him, And so I think that's a really good practice for us, just to like put our phones down, step away, something about moving our bodies, heading in the same direction, having just easy kind of low effort conversation, checking in about the day. That's a really simple one that I think packs a punch. Like, I think we both feel it when we haven't done it.
Yeah. I've learned that too, because I do this walk in the Camino in Spain. And I found too, there's something about not looking at each other's eyes with people that allows some honesty to unfurl
Yeah,
more easily. Do you
agree.
find that also? Yeah.
I agree.
It's like less intimidating. And something about moving in the same direction physically while talking about stuff in the analytical feels
Yeah,
powerful.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And like, seeing, like, for a couple to have a conversation as they're walking, like you're seeing the same thing, like you're sort of seeing the same thing, like it sort of forces, because you're looking in the same direction. It's like
Yeah.
that, like whenever I'm talking about conflict, I'm always like, you have to go shoulder to shoulder looking together at the problem. Well, that's what you're doing when you're walking. So it's like the physical manifestation of how I want people to feel when there's a conflict is like, we are together shoulder to shoulder. We're looking at the problem. The problem is out here. The problem isn't us. The problem isn't figuring out if it's me versus you. It's us together, looking at the problems. I think walking manifests that. Yeah, I can think of a walk that Todd and I took recently where at the beginning of the walk, I was tense as hell and so frustrated with him because he had cracked a joke. He had made a joke that I found to be highly
Like I like
offensive,
thought.
misplaced, whatever. We were like, get our shoes on, let's go the hell for a walk. And the first half of a walk, I could have just like been like, I was just like so frustrated and hurt and da da da. By the end of the walk, I was like, oh my God, I love us. We're okay. We've got this, and it was probably wouldn't have been the same thing if we were sitting on the couch. Something about sitting and being still that for my body, I think creates a sense of like stuckness, trappedness.
Yeah, it's so refreshing to hear somebody else talk about this because Kendra and I also do this.
Mm.
Uh, Perhaps not as intentionally as you do, but we've certainly had a lot of good conversations. And there's something about leaving things behind too, as you kind of talk about them and
Ooh,
leave them behind, and
yeah.
you're moving forward into this fresh space versus on the couch or in a room. It's just
It's all
there.
sitting there.
It's just
Oh,
marinating in
that's
it.
it. As I was telling you the story, I can tell you exactly which part of the walk where I dropped my guard and I moved from angry to under, like I can tell you exactly where that happened. Right. So it kind of like it's like a little like a timestamp almost.
Yeah, where you like put the bag down or put the anger down or
Totally.
yeah.
Totally.
Okay, so
Hmm.
this book you wrote, there's one page a day,
Yep.
and do you offer invitations or challenges or actions for people to do, or is it just like information, like here's a page about conflict resolution,
Mhm,
or
mhm,
like do you have
mhm,
people go for walks, or like what's the
mhm.
bit
It
of all of the
not
above?
every, I would say most, but not all of the entries end with, sort of an action step, or at least like I love a sentence completion. I feel most understood when dot dot dot. What I want my partner to remember is dot dot dot. So there's sentence completions throughout the book, or I call them like relational self-awareness questions. So questions that you could ask yourself or journal off of. But they're very often questions that you can then bring to a conversation with your partner. But not everyone, not every entry has a to do or a to write or to reflect. Sometimes it's just like a here, we've turned the kaleidoscope to this point, and I'm going to write something for you that's about, this one kind of micro slice of the topic of conflict or the topic of, healing from the past.
Yeah, and so people could easily implement it into a daily ritual in the morning or before bed, and
Yeah.
like get the book, read a page, give it some thought,
Yeah, but they
get things.
don't have to. Yeah, and they can do it. I mean, certainly, my gosh, you can do it every day for a year. But there's also some of them, I think, like kind of like, if one like hits you really intensely, then you work with that one for a week, or you put it down and come back in a week. It's not, you don't have to finish the book in a year. It is, there's an April 24th for every April 24th we have going forward, to infinity. So it's not like you don't have to start it anytime or finish it anytime. And in fact, my team and I color coded all of the dates according to like 9 different themes. So if the entry for today is about sex and you're not really wanting to do that work today, you can go and flip through and find one that's about, stages of relationship development and work with that. You also can treat it like a little, like an oracle deck, or a tarot deck, and just open the book to any old page and just see what the universe wants to send you on that day. So there's really I want people to feel a ton of permission with it, because you'll have it forever and it's a lot. I was on NPR talking about it, and the woman who's interviewing me, Jen White, was like, I feel like this is a reference book. And I was like, huh, it could be a reference book. I can see that. It's pretty freaking comprehensive. As I said in the beginning, I'm a lady who's unafraid of hard work. So it's like 400
Yeah,
and something pages.
yeah, and even the description, get your needs met, intimacy, communication. It's one of those things, though, if you start to try to talk about relationships, there's so many parts and pieces, and
Mm-hmm.
as you know, it's like you kind of have to talk about all this stuff because you need to know about all this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? You
I think
can't
so.
not talk about sex. You can't not talk about communication. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well, drat.
I think so too. I think so too. There are topics, like I always think about the music and the lyrics. Like the lyrics are like the topics, like transition to marriage, like dating, like sort of like housework, like sex. That's the lyrics, like the topics. Then there's like the music, like the sort of how we fight, how we tend to the emotions that arise in us during a conversation, like the sort of like the processes. So I think yeah, I find myself like often, because I think my work is about the world of relationships. There's like a lot of like, okay, locating, right? So where are we right now? Because you're right, there's a lot to look at and a lot of different places to stand to learn a
Yeah.
bit more. Mm-hmm.
I think this is a really good place for people to just dive in, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
there is so much, it seems like a helpful resource. It's like
Mm-hmm.
just choose one page and read one page today. Just do
Yep.
that.
It's not gonna be the whole thing, but it's gonna be a thing. And I know there's things that I have to, things that I revisit again and again and again, and little bits that I got to work with over and over. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I hope people will get from it.
Yeah. I'm sure you're familiar. Like I'll be working with clients and hear myself say something. And then a little voice inside is like, oh, really? That's what they need to hear? That's what they should do? And it's like, dang.
Shit.
Shit. All right.
Yeah, I have that
Well,
all the time. I'll watch my clients do something, and I was like, "Oh, they did that really well. I probably ought to do that with Todd
yeah.
sometime." Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Um, just I guess last question would be, is it is there anything you're working on now or looking forward to at the moment?
Hmm.
Kind of exciting thing in the world of
In the
Alexandra
works.
Solomon.
I think it's right. I think that it is. I think it's a period of just like catching my breath a little bit, and I know I love the beginning of a new project, and I'm not quite. I've got a few different. My team and I are playing with like a few different ideas of what we might want to create next or dive into next. One thing that's very immediate is I'm working on a piece and writing an article for my favorite magazine, Psychotherapy Networker, which is our big mental health like magazine. They have a conference, actually, Psychotherapy Networker, and their publishing arm is what published the company that published this book, Love Every Day. But I did
Okay.
a talk for them a couple of months ago about couples and work, like how the ways in which our careers, kind of holding the tension between ambition and intimacy, our desire to succeed at work and our desire to love and be loved, and how these can be synergistic in the best of times and like completely in tension at the worst of times. So I'm working on an article. Yeah, so that's
I'd
the
be curious
immediate next
about that
thing.
one also. That's juicy.
Oh, it's so fun. It's so
And I
fun.
love just
Mm-hmm.
how nerdy you are when you said, "Oh, my favorite magazine." I did not expect you to say Psychotherapy Networker or whatever the title was. Like this is
Cosmo.
so, yeah, or just I don't know, Time or Rolling Stone or
Yeah,
whatever. But like,
yeah.
oh, this is perfect. And I know you've got Instagram accounts, the podcast, the books. I'll put links in the show notes. But is there any specific thing that you want to highlight where people can find you? Get
No,
that.
any and all those. I mean, the website, dralexandrasolomon.com, has got, it's a really easy way to find everything from right podcast, social media, books, e-courses, all of it. So it's all there.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming by. It's always a blast to talk to you.
I really
You're
liked.
one of those people like the when we do drop in, I'm reminded of like how much I like you and how great you are. So thanks for all you do and all you are.
I feel the same way about you, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me on. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
You're welcome.